Hello and welcome to Activating Magic. I'm your host, Darla Ledoux, and I'm here with the fabulous and talented Tracy Matthews. Hi, Tracy.
Darla, thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited just to be chatting with you and talking to your community.
I feel like people are in for a treat today because I've been listening to you and watching your posts on social, and you're in a major reinvention stage.
This is true.
It's always like the most vulnerable and tender time. And I think it's the most potent, really. So
Mm.
I'm excited to talk about that. Let me just give people a little bit of your background. So Tracy is a business strategist, designer, best-selling author of The Desired Brand Effect, and host of the Thrive by Design podcast. She also is in process of Creatives Rule the World. This sounds fun. The founder of Flourish and Thrive Academy and Creatives Rule the World, Tracy has helped over 9,000 creatives to awaken their and bring their creative force energy front and center to grow thriving brands. She's been featured in notable media, including The Today Show, Elle, InStyle, and Entrepreneur.com. Her newest podcast will launch in 2025. So, yay. So, first,
Yay.
before we go into, you've got a framework to share, and I want to talk about your magic. Can you just share a little bit about your own jewelry business and then teaching other creatives how to have a lucrative jewelry brand? Can you just
Thank you.
snippet that
Yes,
for us?
I would love to. So, I started my career 30 years ago as a jewelry artist and a jewelry designer. I learned how to make jewelry in college. There's a whole story behind that. I'll save it for another day. But long story short, I was a very creative person. I loved fashion, I loved design. And 30 years ago, in the mid 90s, early 90s, it was basically the launch of this independent designer craze that is now, there's like tens, hundreds of thousands of independent jewelry designers now. But that was just the beginning of it. And
Mm.
so I launched a brand. I sold to retail stores all around the world. I had my products selling in over 350 outlets over the world. And in 2008, like a lot of people, I was shipping orders and things seemed great until September when the market crashed and all the stores started filing for bankruptcy and leaving me with a ton of bad debt. So I made a tough decision at that point to close that business down. And it felt like I was losing like my
Mm.
child or something like that. And I know that
Yeah.
a business is not like an actual child. So for those of you going to reach out to me, but
Yeah.
when we're putting our, being creative and putting your creations out in the world is very vulnerable for a lot of people. And so there was a period of time when I went through this huge mourning process and wanted to reinvent myself. So, of course, I couldn't completely detach from being a jewelry designer. So, I launched a new jewelry brand, which was just a different business model, designing fine jewelry for private clients. So, I primarily focused on engagement rings, wedding bands, and heirloom redesign pieces. And that took off really quickly. And what I realized during that process is that I'd created this methodology, which I now call the desired brand effect. People were coming to me for coaching and consulting, and I would send them my consulting packages, and they were just starting up and they couldn't afford my monthly fee. So I decided to turn all that knowledge into a program, and I launched a online education company for jewelry business owners called Flourish and Thrive Academy back in 2012. I was one of the OGs in the online space launching something. I had no idea what I was doing. I came from a completely different world, but I figured it out as I went along. And to this date, we've served over and helped over 9,000 different jewelry business owners and helped them create thriving, profitable businesses, which is so fun and exciting.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been
You know,
awesome.
as you were talking about being a designer and then getting in retail, I'm thinking, how did you know how to do that? So I'm guessing you probably have a pattern of not knowing how to do things and then
Yeah.
doing that.
Well, I think we're the same human design number, 6'3", aren't we? The
I'm a
pioneers.
6'2", so
Oh, you're
close.
a 6'2". I'm a 6'3". Anyway, there's something about uh, trial and error that is a theme in my life. And if anyone knows anything about human design, the three line, I think that's what it's called, the three is
Mhm.
all about trial and error. So I've lived a life of just figuring things out as I go, and it's not necessarily the easiest path. So when I launched my jewelry company, the way that you built a business back then was only through selling to retail stores and a little bit doing front end shows, but those weren't as lucrative or as basically they didn't give you as much exposure as getting into stores.
Mhm.
So that was kind of the way you had to do it. So I learned how to pitch accounts, but at those times you had to literally pick up the phone and call people. It wasn't like sending an email or filling out their form on their website because there was no internet there. And I don't even think there was
Yes.
email when I started my business, which is so crazy. I had to pick up the phone. I had a yellow pages book. I would call them, will you come see me? Or I would just like walk in the store with my
Wow.
stuff and kind of cold call. And I would get a lot of rejection. It was like crazy how many no's you would get. But then people would start saying yes. And I think the biggest lesson that I learned in this process, number one, as Marie Forleo says, everything's figure outable. And number two, if you use experiences like any sort of like putting yourself out there, being vulnerable and
Mm.
seeing how things do, like if someone says no to you and you use that experience as a way to become better and as feedback,
Yes.
well, then you've won. Because what I would ask is like, so if someone would say no, they would sometimes give me feedback or I'd ask for the feedback and they'd be like, well, it's not developed enough, or I already have another line like that. So I started picking up these little
Mm.
tidbits along the way. Okay, so maybe should do a little bit better research to the kind of collections they're selling.
Yes.
Because if there's crossover, they're not going to pick it up. Or maybe
Mm.
my collection's not developed enough, which was the problem in the beginning. So there were so many things that I learned in that process. Now it's like you can get all this information online, which is amazing. We're in this fast-paced society,
Mm.
which makes it so much easier for everyone. But what that also creates is a lot more competition, right? Because there's
Yes.
so much more access to how to do it.
Yes. I'm guessing that's where the desired brand effect comes in to stand out.
It does. I
Um,
mean, I think the big thing is with any company that, I mean, this goes across the board. I would interview store owners after I launched my podcast, and I was like, and I already knew this, but I was like, what is the thing? Like, do you prefer buying from a rep or like a showroom, or do you prefer buying from the designer? And almost 95% of the time, they prefer to buy straight from the designer. And so then I would ask, like, what's the thing that makes them stand out and different? And they would say two things. Number one, their brand story, like what makes them different? Like, what
mm.
is their, some people call it a unique selling proposition, but I don't like that because it's
Mhm.
usually about your pricing positioning. It's really, we call it the desired sharing
Yeah.
proposition. Like, what does that make, what
Mm.
makes you different? Like, what are you aligned with? What are the things that someone could actually like put stakes in the ground around or bite their
Yeah.
teeth into? And how are you communicating that messaging to the outside world to embody your brand and infuse your personality into everything that you do? Because if you want to have a business, no matter who you are in a lot of ways the thing that's driving that business forward. And so
Mhm.
creating that desired brand effect, which means people have desire and demand for whatever it is that you're selling, all comes down to not just the product and your pricing, but your messaging and how you position yourself in the marketplace. And so
Mm.
that's the juice, I guess, as we say,
What
because
was your first brand back when you were
it was
first
so
retail?
original, Darla. It was so original. Tracy
Was it your
Matthews
name?
Designs. Yes.
Awesome. I love
So
it.
what was interesting, I learned something really fascinating about that because had I played my cards a little bit different, there would have been a potential and possibility for me to sell that jewelry line. I did
Mm.
have some exposure, but basically I started the business as my name, and it's hard to sell your name. So
Mhm.
for anyone who's starting a product business, if they listen to this or you want to add a physical product to your brand or something, consider the name of what you're putting yourself out there in the world as, because if you
Yes.
position yourself right, if you do get to a place where you're bored or you're ready to move on, there is an opportunity to sell it if the business is profitable, right? But if it's
Yes.
your name, it's a little bit harder because not all of us are Donna Karen or Kate Spade or one of those people who sold their names back in the day.
Yes. Yes. I think of Kendra Scott. I lived in
Yeah, Kendra
Austin
Scott. She still owns her company though.
Yeah. Does she?
Mhm. She
Amazing.
does. Yeah. I just listened to her book.
Um,
It's a good one.
so Flourish and Thrive Academy, I'm curious. I want to talk about your magic within this. So you had people coming to you, you're working with them, they're asking for advice, and you're kind of figuring out what does everybody need, coming up with your frameworks and things,
Mhm.
ways to help them. And I'm curious when you would, if you put yourself back when you were starting out, in that, when you would meet a new jewelry designer, how did you know what they really needed?
Mm. Well, be this a gift or uh, not necessarily like hopeful or whatever. I actually really am fantastic at seeing people's potential. Not so helpful when you're dating and when you're single and dating, but really
Totally get
helpful
that.
in inspiring people to see their full potential. And so it's easy for me to look at a jewelry business owner and tell them exactly what they need because I can see what's missing in
Mm,
their messaging, in their marketing, in what they believe about themselves. Because I think a lot of success as a creative has more to do with your belief system about how you show up and who you believe yourself to be, more so than your actual skill set and talent. Because I have seen some of the most insanely talented artists who have never become successful because of what's in between their ears, right? Because they don't believe that they're capable of what they say that they want, or they're unwilling to take the actions that it's going to take to build the business or the brand that they want to create because they let their fear or their belief system about themselves get in the way of moving forward. Because something that I think is that we forget is that any sort of fear, any sort of hesitation, any sort of anxiety or experience that we're having in a moment is just a feeling, right? It's not the truth.
mm,
And the fastest cure for that is actually moving in the direction of what it is that you want.
yes.
So taking just one
Mm.
step. Can I tell a fun story?
Yeah, of course.
So when I was starting out, I had a successful side hustle for many years. And at that time, like I was in my early 20s, and this is back in the 90s. So I was probably making $30,000 a year at my job at Nordstrom. And I would
Mm.
sometimes bring in anywhere from like $15,000 to $20,000 a year with my side hustle, like just selling jewelry on the side, hosting these jewelry parties and stuff like that. So I felt like I was like like a boss. Like that was a lot of money back then. I was in my
Yes.
20s, you know what I mean? Like doing the whole thing. I got married when my ex-husband finally like got solidified after we'd moved to San Francisco and solidified in his career. He's like, "You're going to quit your job at Nordstrom and you're going to launch this jewelry company." So it was funny what would happen. It was so easy for me to do it as a side hustle because I had this other security blanket of this other job,
Mm.
right? But when I went out to do this full time and I'm like, well, I'm already a boss, like I'm selling 20 grand a year, doing this as a side hustle, it'll be easy to do this as a full-time gig. I was like paralyzed in fears because I didn't know what
Mhm.
to do.
Right.
So my ex-husband Mike would ask me every day when I come home, oh, so how many sales did you make? And I was like, I'm perfecting my collection, or I would make all these excuses. And it wasn't until I got to this point where it was like, okay, you have to go back. Like my feet were in the fire. You have to go back to your job at Nordstrom if you can't figure this out, because we can't survive in San Francisco on this little income. So the way that I moved through it is just creating a list of like 3 things I had to do that were sales activities every single day. And I'm like, if I could just like get through the anxiety and the feeling like I'm going to throw up if I do this, if I can just get through that and do the thing and realize I'm still going to be okay if someone says no, well, is that then at least I've tried. And I can't in good conscience like just go back to a job because I didn't really try, because I was really just making excuses, right? And so I started building this momentum. It's just like these little steps, right? Moving forward.
Yeah.
And that started opening doors. And then I started asking better questions. I started asking for help. I started asking for introductions. And then really quickly, everything opened up for me. So that first year, I tell this story a lot of times when I'm teaching master classes and stuff like that, because what people don't realize, it's just like the little steps you take are the things that open the big doors. And pretty quickly, within the next year and a half, I'd opened doors to two of the best jewelry stores like in the industry at that time, Twist Online, which is an amazing jewelry store, and this local store in San Francisco called Metier, which they now still sell jewelry and they're still around, just in a different location. And then that, when people would be like, okay, where are you sold? And I'd be like, oh, I sell to Twist and Metier. That opens up the whole world to something else. And so my point here is that when you're moving through this process and not sure like what to do next, just if you could just step back, okay, what are the 3 things that I can do today that's going to move me closer to what it is that I want and develop better habits, right? That's just going to push me forward into the next thing. And the thing that's interesting is I'm coaching myself on this right now because I have this established business. It's a 7-figure brand. It's awesome. Like, we serve so many people, but I'm in the state of like, okay, like it's time for my heart and my soul to move on to the next iteration. But I'm sitting here procrastinating and not doing it. I mean, I'm not, that's not anymore. I was in this huge process, and I've been talking a lot about it on my social media. And I'd be just like, I'm so afraid to share this because I felt like it made me feel weak. And one of the things that's been really fascinating is every time I share an authentic story about like not having it all figured out and wanting to move in this new direction, those posts end up getting so much engagement because a lot of people are feeling that. And so the lesson that I've learned, and that I continue to learn, it's like you have to start over with a beginner's mind, right? Is when you have to go back to the basics sometimes when you're launching something new. And the answers will unfold if you're willing to take those steps and keep walking forward.
3 steps a day.
3 steps a day. I mean, you could take more than that, but if you can commit to 3, I think
right.
that's
It feels
tangible.
achievable.
Yeah.
Yes. So I want to go back to seeing people's potential.
Yeah.
And seeing where the holes are. And so, one of the premises of this podcast is I have a quiz called the Source Magic, and there's 6 archetypes. When you're talking about it, I hear recognition magic, that's seeing the gaps. So, there's like a making connections and then seeing what's missing. That recognition magic does really naturally. And I also hear expansion, like seeing the highest possibility. And I feel like when we talked about vibration. So
I feel like I'm all the magics. I don't know what it is because tell me the 5 magics again. I can't remember off the top of my head which one I was.
So there's recognition, sensation, compassion, expansion, expression, and vibration.
I think I tested probably the expansion one.
Okay. That's the very first thing you said was, I see their highest potential, which feels like expansion. So
yeah. But the recognition, like, I don't know. I mean, my partner, Jason, now, he's a pattern recognition master, but I think I'm really good at recognizing patterns too. I just don't acknowledge that within myself. And so it is something that I can see. It's like really easy for me to see like what's missing for someone else. It's hard for me to see for myself, but it's easy for me to see for someone else. And so it's very easy for me to say, like, all you really have to do is X, Y, and Z. It's like that extra 5% that gets them across the line, right? And I mean, sometimes it's a little bit of a bigger lift. Someone has to develop their brand or their messaging or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, I think,
Well, and I'm imagining that you can see the pieces to expand on in their brand, like what matters about it and what doesn't.
For sure. People get hung up on funny things. And I was just talking to a designer today. I had a hot seat earlier today with my coaching program. One of the designers is like, I've done these collection launches and they've always done really well, but like the last 3 haven't launched. And I'm like, okay, well, have you analyzed like what's been different? She's like, well, each of the collections is a little bit different. Some are higher price point, some are lower price point. And I'm like, okay, when you sold out of all of them, like people don't even like think about this for themselves. What was the thing that was in common? Oh, well, they were all kind of easier, more approachable price points. And that expanded on some of these other things. And so I'm like, well, connect the dots. Like maybe there's a way that you could just expand on not necessarily being everything for everyone, but also be able to release something that is in a price point that's more approachable so that you can get some of that traction and feel like, okay,
Yeah.
I've sold out. It's just simple things like that. I think a big thing that my favorite thing though to really focus on and work with people on is the messaging piece, because I see so many people out there, they're being so formal in how they're presenting themselves in the world. And they don't really understand how to create a brand that's relatable. And there's something big about developing that connection up front instead of trying to build this status. Because, you know, if we're talking in jewelry terms, most people out there are not Harry Winston, and most people aren't serving a Harry Winston, or, I mean, some might be serving a Tiffany's customer because they have lower price point things, but like, you're not serving this like highfalutin status. Most of them aren't. They're not selling high jewelry.
Right.
And what people want is to feel connection, right?
Yes.
And that connection comes with how you're relating to your customers, right? So the more you can create that connection, the easier it is to make a sale at the end of the day. So,
Well, and it's so easy within your own filter. Like I know I have things I teach, right? And I know how I teach them and what it means. And it's like, who cares versus just saying the thing that's present and trusting people to connect with it, right? So
yes,
even in this world, it's really easy to go, oh, but this means this. And it's like, no, it means whatever people think it means. That's the reflection
exactly.
I've been in lately.
Yeah, it means whatever you think it means. Exactly. I love that.
So yeah, so the kind of that feels like a good segue, being less formal and connecting, and you're sharing a lot of content around your own journey. You said, you know, the things where you really don't know what to say or you're figuring it out, people
Ugh,
are really relating to.
it's so uncomfortable.
Yeah, talk a little bit about that because you know, obviously we met on retreat, so we had a, you know, sense of vulnerability in our connection to begin with. But I think that's a real gift that you have. And so it's interesting to hear it's still uncomfortable.
Yeah, I am one of those people who will share almost anything with anyone, but because this process that I'm going through has been so, ooh, I might start crying. It feels really big. And Darla was this event that I was speaking at where I like lost my, can I swear on this podcast?
Yes.
I lost my shit on stage and start crying in front of 300 people. And Darla and I spent my birthday together. And I've just felt, I've been so clear for so long. And I felt lost for a minute because I know that my heart is calling me in this new direction. And I've been in this phase of limbo, one foot in the old version of me and one foot in this evolved version of myself. And being a spiritual entrepreneur and being who's really tapped in and all these things, you would think that it would be so easy to just bypass all of the emotions that come with potentially letting go of something that's been your identity for so long, or in a way, your identity. Because a little backstory, I really did build Flourish and Thrive Academy out of one of the biggest traumas of my life. The thing that I didn't mention is when all those bankruptcy notices started flooding in, I had to file for bankruptcy myself because I was left with so much debt, I couldn't pay it off because I was expecting the payment on those orders to keep my cash flow going. And it was a significant amount of money. Like if you have a monthly nut of $60,000 in expenses and you're expecting, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars to come in the holiday season, and you get 10 and that's it, $10,000, and you have all these bills, like how do you overcome that? Like I was in a really bad spot. And so I made this difficult choice that has impacted my entire life. And I started this business out of this trauma that I experienced. And so every day when I mean, I've healed it since and have a different relationship with the business now. But for years, I would be showing up and like beating the business up and not understanding, going through this massive trauma loop every single fall.
Mm.
And
Mm.
I finally identified the root cause of why it was happening. Thank you, Jason, and my friend Spencer, if you're listening. You're very pivotal in this process. But it's still like the emotions still come up. So it becomes really challenging because when you have become sorry,
Mm.
when you've been a trailblazer in an industry for so long, part of me has felt like I needed to continue to trailblaze in that community. But
Yeah.
the question I've been asking myself, is there a way to keep the legacy alive that I've created without me having to be in the old version of me, which is
Mm.
painful. I cry
What's
a
the
lot. I'm
old
very
version?
emotional. And today is a full moon in Aries as we are filming this, and I have an Aries moon, so and it's an
Mm.
emotional type of moon. So anyway,
Wow, perfect.
long story, it's all perfect,
Yeah,
right?
thank
Crying
you.
in public. It's great. Anyway, what I will say about this though to your listeners is that if you don't deal with the things that are keeping you
Mm.
compressed or however you want to express that,
Yeah.
if you're bored in your business or your life in any way and you don't have a creative outlet, you are going to experience extreme burnout. You're going to probably burn something down that is actually serving you. And
Mm.
there is a different way. It's just you have to have a way to express your creativity and put your energy out in a different way. And so I want to encourage everyone to consider that as an
Mm.
option, because this stage of transition that I'm in right now, it's like I know that I have this big mission to fulfill, and it feels so scary that I'm literally in this place of being afraid of the impact that I'm going to make. And it doesn't even make sense to me. It doesn't
Yeah,
make sense. And
it
so,
makes sense. It makes sense to me. And I am curious about a few things. Thank you for your vulnerability.
yeah,
I'm curious about, you said how to be the new version of me, right? Like, how can I continue to serve the community without having to be the old version?
yes.
And then this piece of being afraid of the impact. One of the things I've developed in my work is I call them the love patterns. And I'm kind of in it with my love pattern in this transition. And it's called protect. And there's this sense of like protecting people from me that I
Yeah, I
experienced
feel that.
because people couldn't handle me when I was young, right? It was a lot. And um, in a very, intimate way, right? Like seeing people.
Hmm.
And I'm undoing a lot of that. And
Mm,
so I don't know how people respond, right? When I'm fully me
wow.
versus the contained version.
That's so
And
interesting.
yeah, I'm curious how, yeah,
There's a
what the
reason why
present.
we're friends, Darla. I think it's interesting because, we met in a healing space originally. We we've been like social media friends, but like we reconnected again this year, and it's been like really powerful friendship for me because like it was unexpected to have this kind of connection with you, and we are living in such a synergistic parallel lines. I feel like in a certain way, and there's something interesting that happens with children. I grew up in a really big family. There was a lot of chaos in my childhood. I'm the second oldest of 8 kids, and I grew up in a house with 6 other kids. My parents are lovely, amazing people. My mom passed away a long time ago, but like both hysterical, didn't know how to be parents like a lot of people who raised children in the 70s were in 80s, I'm
Yes.
sure. Um, I was really misunderstood though as a kid. And I think many of my siblings were. And there were some profound moments where, in a lot of ways, my needs weren't getting met because I didn't know how to express them, and crying wasn't, and being emotional wasn't really, even though it was an extremely emotional household, it wasn't really like allowed in a way. Like there is always like, stop crying, instead of like trying to understand what was happening. And now that I know more about myself as an adult, right? I'm an Aries moon. We're highly emotional. We have a short fuse. We are impatient. We want to get things moving very quickly. We say what we mean and regret it later. It's like being a person like that, I'm misunderstood a lot because you don't understand how you are perceived in the world, right? And then being someone who's highly creative, but also an artist, and not knowing how to express that artistic ability and being told in a certain way that that's not valued is hard to understand as a little kid and also a teenager. Like I was dating this guy almost all my high school career, and he was walking me to my art class one day and he's like, art classes are for stupid people. What are you doing, Tracy? And I'm like, oh,
Wow.
I'm not stupid, so I'm not going to take any more art classes. And so I like started taking science. I'm like, oh, I'm going to crush this because I can draw in biology. And I got like A+ in biology because I could draw the specimens, and it's interesting the things that we pick up and how that becomes a burden, and how we reserve ourselves because we're afraid of how we're going to impact other people.
Yeah.
So that thing that you said about protection or protect, that really lands with me.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's out of love, right? Like I
Yeah.
don't want to hurt you by me being
Yeah.
in my fullest expression, or having
Mm.
all my feelings, or just going the direction I want to go. I'm imagining, I have a certification, so I have a similar kind of feeling of responsibility, right? Like,
Yes.
okay, we have this badge. I want to make sure it means something.
Mm-hmm.
You have the academy and all of these people watching as you're sorting out, can I be the new version of me here? I'm curious if like, have you named like the old version and the new version of you energetically?
I haven't named it, but the old version is like trauma Tracy is maybe the best way to put it. Like being very reactive and like doing things in operating from a space of
Mm,
being in fight or flight.
yeah.
The new version of me, it's funny. I was in this, like, when I first learned about the online world and all this stuff, I met a woman who's a friend of mine named Erica Learmark, and she had us like name our identities. And at that time, because I was like working with jewelry designers, the thing that's coming to mind is like, I called the positive vibes one, who was like super attractive amethyst. So like stepping more into that like powerful movement leader person who gets what they want and being able to have everything that they want, but also being able to align their energy with what matters to them. Because the work that we're doing with my team right now is this, like, they all want Flourish and Thrive Academy to continue, but I'm really clear, like, here is my role in this company. So if we can't figure this out without me being in this seat, then I can't do it anymore. And I made a very clear energetic boundary, and it's been interesting to see what's happening because there's a little burnout happening, but we're working with the team members to figure that out. But like, people are stepping up. Okay, the boundary is clear. This is what she's willing to do. And we have to figure out, how do we generate the cash flow we need to keep the business going without Tracy being the business? We figured it out in a lot of ways. Many years ago, I understood that if I wanted to build the kind of business that I wanted to build, like, I couldn't be the only person delivering the content. I'm too creative for that. I have to have a variety of things that I'm doing, because it just becomes boring to me to do the same thing over and over again. But there are people in my community who have learned it, who love it, and they love teaching it. So
Yeah.
I can train them to teach it for me.
Mhm.
And they're better coaches because they're more patient and they just love helping those people who are getting like super stuck in that earlier stage. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Attractive amethyst, I
Yeah.
hear,
Yeah.
is like in her power. I heard a
Yes.
lot of boundaries, which I am really relating to also. And I don't know if you feel this, Tracy, but I feel like, man, I sure hope I identify them all right now,
Yes.
so I don't have to like revamp them again. But trauma Tracy, I'm just imagining people thinking, okay, you have this 7-figure business and, people are getting amazing results. And surely trauma Tracy didn't create all of it, right? Because there's like, you've done a lot of healing work.
Yes. Oh gosh, I've been on a healing journey my entire life. Thank goodness for plant medicine these last 5 years. It's really supported me in so many ways. Um, Also
I'm
giving me the
thinking,
realization that I don't always want to be in a process. I want to be enjoying
mm,
life because that's what we're meant to be doing. And
yeah.
that's really the clarity that I got. So we have these different identities, right? That make up our
Mhm.
core identity. And sometimes versions of ourselves have to die in order for us to progress into the new version. And my life has not been easy. You might look at it on the outside and be like, oh, well, that person, she just seems like she has done all
Mhm.
these things and things come easy. Like, my got married to someone who was very similar to my dad. It generated the same pattern. My mom died when I was 22. Like, parents stopped paying for my university, which high class problems, a lot of people pay for their own university, but there was just like a lot of pushing forward, like to try to get the
Mhm.
thing. I just felt like every
Yeah.
time I started to make progress, there was another setback. And this has been my entire life. Like, build this business, another setback. Build the business, another setback. And that is part of life and part of running a business. But they've been like really major lessons. And so I know that now is the time to learn the lessons from all of those things and understand like I don't have to be in fight or flight all the time. I don't have to be operating out of these old patterns that I had to get what I want. Maybe it could just be easy. And maybe I
Mhm.
could just call in the people who are meant to learn from me. And maybe,
Mhm.
it doesn't have to be such a grind. And I feel like that's kind of the part that I'm letting go. It's like, and that transition's scary. I'm going to be honest with you. Like, when you're in that transition, you experience cash flow issues every single day. I'm like, okay,
Mhm.
is the business like going to make it because of, we're in a cycle right now? And how can I continue supporting my team without like being a complete disaster all the time? I mean, there's a lot to it, right?
Yeah.
I'm always managing my energy every single day. It's like an hour of personal development work in the morning, sitting there journaling, gratitude, visioning, like all the things. Because like if I don't, then I show up like a mess and it's not good for anyone, right? So it's been interesting. I don't know if I
Yeah.
answered your question. I feel like I keep going on these tangents, but hopefully
Yeah,
it's helpful.
no, I think I'm sure people appreciate that transparency. And um, I also was thinking as you were sharing that some part of you probably like you got emotional about, December 2008 and that visceral experience, right?
Yeah.
And you're
Every
continuing to
September,
clear
I go
it.
through this feeling of like, I'm going to lose everything again. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's crazy when things happen to you, how you don't even remember, you don't even consciously remember, but your body remembers. Like,
Yes.
it's crazy. And so healing my nervous system has been like a big part of this process too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I really relate to um, maybe this is a rite of passage of like building the business around you and you're handling
Mhm.
everything and, making it happen. And then, the awakening around what if I didn't do that anymore? What if I didn't put myself through that? What if I nurture myself differently? What if I trust that whatever I can give is what people want and it's a match? And
Yeah, it's true.
I think we do that.
And I think the one thing that is the most powerful lesson that I could probably impart here is that the more out of alignment you are with whatever it is that you're creating, the harder it's going to be. And so when you are in this mode of things feeling hard, or you're bored, or you're maybe even experiencing burnout, the most important thing that you can do is just step back for a minute and be like, okay, what would it take for me to get back into alignment? And like, what does that look like? Because if something really big is calling on your heart, you have to do it. You have to pursue it. You have to move forward, or you're just going to, the universe is just going to keep coming back to you and giving you harder and harder and harder lessons to learn until you move in that direction. And even if it feels scary, like I feel like part of me is like, I know what I'm doing. I know, like, I already have a framework and everything that I'm moving in this new direction for. And the vision for it, I have it all. And even, but like the subconscious is trying to keep me safe. And like the shit show that's happening internally inside is all because of things that aren't even true. It's just something that is a feeling. And so every day, just showing up, getting back into alignment. This is who I really am.
Ooh.
This is who I really
I
am.
love this. I
This
had
is
this
who I really am.
conversation with a magical friend, and I would think I was just speculating on what I think is coming next, and she said, "Oh my God, you already know," and just like looked at me dead set. And so I've been coming from that place of like, oh wait, what if I do already? What if all of the like, oh maybe I'm wrong, is just like couching, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's scary because when you put, this is the thing, and it's like the artists, it's like the root of the artist, the starving artist thing, right? It's like, what if I put it out there and people don't respond, right? Well, I'm going to go back to what I said in the beginning. Use that as feedback. How can you reposition it, or remassage it, or reinvent it so that it is something that lands? And this is something that Jason used to say to my community all the time. The art is not the artist. So just because someone doesn't respond in the way that you expected, it's not a reflection necessarily of who you are as a human being.
That's good.
Yeah.
So talk about creativity. I know you have a new framework, and create is the center of it. Yeah. What would you want to share about why creativity is so important in a transition, in a transformation? Why is that?
Well, I think creativity is the root of all abundance. It is on the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's like one of the steps to self-actualization. The more creative you are, and everyone is creative. I don't care who, I mean, this is a magical podcast. So, source energy, I'm sure most of the people on this podcast are more in alignment with creativity. But I believe that everyone's creative, because your creative gifts just are reflective in a different way. Even the most analytical spreadsheet guy is creative on how they're building financial models. Like it is formulaic and all those things, but at the end of the day, you have to understand how all of these pieces of the puzzle work together. So innately in all of us, there is this untapped creative force that we have. And a lot of times we let it lie dormant because we're getting into routine or habits or things that are actually just working. And we're like, okay. And I do think, as my friend Julie Solomon says, boring money is an important part of having a thriving, successful business, because we don't want to disrupt things. So instead of disrupting your business that's actually working, maybe there's another way to express your creativity in a different creative outlet. So maybe it's launching a new direction in the business, or launching a new direction or theme in particular. But at the root of it, the more that we can stay tapped into our creative juices and spend more time being creative every single day, every single week, the more sourced energy, I'll just use your language, the more sourced energy we're going to have, because that creativity is our vitality. It is the root of like what gives us the juice to keep on going. And it's the thing that helps us solve complex problems. It's the things that helps us put our art in the world, obviously. It's the thing that helps us innovate. It is the juice that is the core of our vitality as a human being. So make more time to be creative. And like one of the things that I did years ago was Wednesday is my creative day every single week. So I have a full day, and it's a day of open space because creativity can't be, it can be scheduled, but it can't be, you can't just sandwich it in for like an hour.
Check
You know,
the
it
box.
needs,
Yeah.
yeah, and check a box. Like you need open space for that. And sometimes it happens right away. And, you know, if you don't allow enough space for it, it's usually right when you get to the best part of it that you have to go on to something else. So it needs no boundaries. This is the one thing that it needs an open container to like really thrive in. So I'd really encourage anyone listening today, and I don't know what your situation is, but make the time for creativity. If it's not once a week, once a month, try to do something creative every single day, whether it's a journaling practice or a movement practice or some sort of creative expression. And I would recommend starting your day that way because it's going to help you in everything else that you do. And even if you're a busy mom, like make some time, get up 10 minutes earlier, do a 10-minute practice every single morning that helps you tap in, because that creativity is going to be the thing that fuels everything else. And if you want to learn a little bit more about my 5-step framework, I'm creating a secret podcast that I'm going to be launching really soon. You could just, I'll share this with Darla later, but you can just DM me on Instagram and I'll share that with you. And it walks you, we're running out of time, but it walks you through the 5-step framework of developing any new idea and being more creative in your everyday life so that you can unleash your creative force, because that creative force energy is the most important thing.
I love it. So they can just, you want them to message you secret?
Yeah. Yeah. Shoot me a DM. I'm also, depending on when this is launched, I can send you a link too. But the easiest thing to do is to shoot me a DM on Instagram with the word secret, and then I will send you a link to get that secret podcast.
Yeah. And follow Tracy on Instagram.
Yeah. It's at Tracy Matthews NY as this one is going live.
What's your conclusion about boredom?
So don't be bored for too long, because if you stay in a state of boredom, you'll start to burn everything else around you. And that leads to burnout. That leads to destruction. That leads to you disrupting your life in the ways you probably don't want it disruptive. Instead, channel that boredom into a new creative outlet. One of the things that I told Jason, my partner, the other day, he's like, and because I was in a really rough spot, just like super emotional. It was September, because like September is a really rough month for me, and I'm like healing it, but still, I just go through all the feels. And I'm like, I just wish I could sit around and paint all day. So maybe it's just like doing something as silly as like painting, and like having something to do that takes your mind off everything else, because that's when the big ideas actually come, when you're not thinking about them.
I can look back at times I've been bored and didn't know I was bored, and the impact of that. So
yeah,
thank you
I mean, it
for
shows
that.
up in funny ways, right? Like
Yes.
being a bitch. It shows up as like, you know, eating all the ice cream that you don't need to. You know, I mean, it's just like, it shows up in funny ways, right?
Yes. Secret sabotage. That's what comes to mind. So Tracy, when I think about this podcast, it's going to the ears of people all over the globe. And I particularly imagine the person who is maybe a little bit different in their family, they're magical, and maybe no one else gets them, or they don't yet have that community around them where they get to express fully. What would you say to them?
You're freaking amazing, and don't let anyone dim who you are, because you are special. Like, you're here to make a mark on this world in your own way. And don't let anyone tell you anything other than that, because you need to be seen and heard. And that full expression of you needs to be experienced by the right people.
Mm. Ooh, I love that. Thank you, Tracy. I so appreciate you
Darla.
and your magic in the world and your friendship, and I'm excited to share this.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Have an amazing day, everyone, and we'll see you in the next episode. All right.
And now you have to go. I hope that that was
Do
good enough.